everyone, Ariel Adams here with aBlogtoWatch. Welcome to the Superlative Podcast. Don't forget to listen to our other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we go over the latest news and reviews. Today on Superlative, my guest is Max Resnick. He's an independent watch designer with more than a decade of experience. Max, welcome.
Thank you, Ariel. It's lovely to be here.
So this is one of many conversations we've had. We tried to do a podcast before and it got ruined. I feel it's important to disclose that, and we had to re-record. So this is like take two, and it's going to be better, right?
Absolutely. And a pleasure to talk to you again. Any excuse.
Yeah. So you just told me the regrettable news that you didn't get to go to Watches and Wonders 2025. Obviously, now the major watch trade show of the year, since there's only one big one. I guess it's an important question to ask. Do you feel regret, or is it just like, oh, that's fine, I'll make the next one? Like me as media, like I have no choice. Unless I'm dead or in a hospital bed, it's like I have to be there, you know?
No, absolutely. I mean, I certainly would love to have been there. I had a lot of clients and collaborators and suppliers that were all there, and would have loved to have had the chance to catch up with them all in one place rather than intermittent trips throughout the year. Just this year didn't work out. I was instead puppy training, and so was just as sleep deprived as I would have been at the show, but for a very different reason.
Now, one of the things that I know that brand managers care a lot about, and I'm curious to know if you care about this as well as a designer, is the reactions that people have. You know, you see something, you think it's great, then maybe the client has some feelings about it in the supply chain, but it isn't until the product reaches, I guess you could say, a dispassionate consumer or public that you sort of really start to feel what people think about and how they respond. When you go to shows, are you looking at how people respond, or as a designer, do you actually not care?
I think there's two ways of looking at it, really, as a designer. I think obviously it's always nice to see the gut reaction to a project that you've designed, and to see a positive response. But actually, it doesn't really matter because you're designing for a broad consumer group and you're designing for a particular part of that. And so, really, for a project that you're involved in, it's about getting a reaction, whether it's good or bad. You want to get an opinion. What you never want is it for it to fall flat and everyone's a bit like, meh. That's the worst possible response. Strong good, strong bad. That's what I'm looking for. When it comes to reactions of other projects, and when I see people responding to different things that come out in the market, that's really insightful to me, because it's more about the general direction of where the market is going. If people are less excited about sports watches one year and more excited about dress watches, that's quite interesting. The only thing that I would say about that, though, is that as a designer, we're thinking perhaps 2-3 years ahead. So we always need to be a little bit careful of responding in what we develop with new product from what people are reacting to right now.
So I'm trying to unpack that, because you sort of said yes and no at the same time as I listened to you carefully. I guess what I'm hearing you say is that the whole point is the reaction. So it would be impossible to ignore it, yet you can't be overly moved by one person's reaction, because that's not who you're designing for. You're not designing for one person, but maybe yourself. Maybe at the end of the day, maybe you're not that designer. But I know a lot of designers, like, they're consumer number one, right? If they don't like it, it's done.
So I think that's a really interesting question, particularly within the design community. There are very strongly differing views of thought as to what should be the case here.
Really?
For me, I mean, some designers, as you say, they would love to be the consumer, and so they design something that they absolutely love, they adore, and they pitch that to the brand. The brand gets very excited, and the product is developed. And you can get some incredibly strong concepts from that and really unique ideas that are really design-led. I've done that occasionally. It is very fulfilling. It's very enjoying to take on that kind of project. But actually, as a designer, I lean more towards trying to capture the essence of a brand and bring out what they're about. And my job is not to put forward my view, but to create the best possible interpretation of what that brand could be and what it could want. And so, as you probably will have seen from some of the portfolio I've been able to share with you over the years, there are very disparate projects I've been involved in of completely differing tastes. And it's not to say that any one of those is my taste, but they reflect that brand in what I would intend to be the best possible way.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to move on to a different topic, and that is, I'll call it beauty. I've come to the conclusion, as silly as it sounds, over the last actually several months, that when it comes to design, beauty is important to me. Not just watches, everything. Like, even art. Like, I recognize that there is ugly art out there, and it is art, and it may still be valuable and worth discussing. Yet I don't like ugly art. I don't like ugly watches either, though I'll put up with some of them if they're really good function from a functional standpoint. With that said, I start to wonder where the evaluation of beauty comes from. It's odd because there's this deep subjective nature to beauty, but there's also this sort of objective, almost mathematical element to it. And I'm wondering, where do designers learn beauty? Do all of them learn beauty? And in your opinion, how important is beauty when it comes to the design of a luxury timepiece?
So I completely agree with you. I think it is so important. A watch is not an essential item, particularly now. It is a luxury good. It is a considered purchase for someone who really wants to celebrate a moment or to collect or to acquire things of beauty. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be conventionally beautiful, but it has to be a desirable object and it has to be refined and considered and well thought out. And so there are many different ways in which we could consider something beautiful. But I do think it is very important to people that what we create with watches, with luxury goods, with other products are really well designed for their purpose. And so a luxury good like a watch will have a very different purpose and have a very different perception of beauty to perhaps a kitchen item that has to have a very functional purpose.
So where is this beauty learned? Is this something that people just sort of pick up? Does school teach it to you? Because one of the things that I've noticed amongst aficionados as well as designers of watches and things like that is that one thread many of them have in common is being aware of good art and design from a young age. Often it's around them, their family, maybe the city they grew up in. But being exposed to beauty seems to be a prerequisite. Then you can sort of learn about it, understand it, curate it. But I'm curious from your perspective if it's something that can be taught. Do you have to sort of grow up around it? Does it have to be in your culture? You know, how does someone acquire a sense of beauty in your opinion?
So I think that the process can be taught for developing something. When you can go to school, college, university, and you can learn the process of developing a design from the early brief right the way through. And you can learn how to do background research, quantitative, qualitative research as well, and start to understand why you're designing something and how to develop it. But as far as actually having that instinct, I think it is a lived experience. It doesn't have to be from you're young, although it often is. And it's about immersing yourself in culture, art, design, various experiences as well. And then you can pull and draw on all of that in the way you approach projects. I mean, I certainly had a creative upbringing with my family, and I was definitely in art galleries and various things like that when I was younger. I can't deny that would have affected me, and that certainly influences my approach to design right now. And so I've gone through various sort of educational training over the years and learnt design. But a lot of what I do is also that gut feel and that instinct for that looks right, that doesn't look right, this proportion feels correct.
I guess I've been thinking about a lot because going to Watches and Wonders, you definitely see those watches. And this isn't just new watches. This is also line extensions, which are and are not beautiful. And I've seen some briefs before. I mean, you've seen tons more than me, but design briefs. And usually the word beautiful or attractive is never even in there, right? No one's saying, make me a pretty thing that looks like this, or just like, I need a GMT. So I'm wondering where along the approvals process or whatever, do things go right or go wrong? Because a lot of people put effort into it. They want it to be good, yet yes, somehow, despite best efforts, really ugly things come about. And I'm wondering not just how that happens, but who saves it? Is it like a brand manager is like, whoa, that's not good looking. We can't say yes to that. You know what I mean? Like, where is this? Where is the checks and balances to make sure that beauty gets through at least enough of the time?
So it's tricky because every process is different. Every brand, every company works in a slightly different way, has a slightly different process for signing off on new product. With some of the smaller companies or some of the indies, you've got one watchmaker, one brand founder who makes the decisions. And so they can very clearly say, I love that, I don't love that, this little detail isn't right. And you can iterate from there. When you're working with one of the larger companies, though, you will have product managers, you will have other levels of management who go beyond them, you will have people in marketing, you'll have people in the engineering department. And then you start to get a committee saying, well, I would change this a little bit, or what about doing this? What about doing that? And so sometimes the risk is that by bringing too many people involved and having too many decision makers, the project or the product starts to move further and further away from the original intent. Something that I've always found very important in developing the more creative watches that I've been involved in is, rather than starting with that committee basis of what's possible, what do we need to tweak or change, and who are we working for, we try and develop effectively like a concept car, the idealized perfect interpretation of the brief. What is it that we're really, really aiming for? It could be exaggerating the proportions, it could be pushing the design as far as possible, and then we can work back from there if we can to adjust it to make sure it's ready for production, rather than trying to go from what's feasible from the very start, because sometimes you can be a little bit stifled by that, and then you can end up with a lackluster product at the end.
Final question on this topic. What can or should a designer say if the project comes to the phase where some of the powers that be, not the designers, want to make changes which will move something into a direction of ugliness? What can a designer do maybe to persuade them to maybe not do that, or to put the brakes on it, or to consider spending as much as it costs to do it? You know what I mean? Because I feel that a communicative designer may be able to help, even if that's not necessarily their role to fight for the integrity of the project all the time. You know what I mean?
I think it's absolutely their role to fight for that.
Okay.
I mean, from my perspective, I think it is my duty as a designer to help a brand achieve the best possible product at the end. And so if I feel something isn't right, or I feel like it's going a direction where we're diluting that or weakening the possibility of what it would be, I will do my best to make my case for what I think is the right solution. That is very much a facilitated effort. Sometimes it takes lots of iteration to show them, okay, this is what you're asking for. This is what I think we should do. And you put them up side by side and you have some discussions, and then you start to go, actually, yeah, maybe this is the right way to go. I don't always win, that's for sure. And I probably never will always win, but I certainly make my case when I think things are going the wrong direction and try to make sure we keep on the right track.
Hopefully good taste prevails most of the time. So I know you weren't there, but let's talk a little bit about Watches and Wonders 2025. There's an article I wrote that hasn't been published yet where I sum up, I do these articles after the show where I try to talk about the business environment and the overall trends. I'm interested in seeing those trends. And every single year the brands are like, yeah, we don't look to the side. And lo and behold, there's like 4 brands that do the same random thing, right? Or there's colors that everyone seems to have. I would say the word I used, right? The overall word I used to describe everything was regurgitation. Funny enough, a lot of the Europeans didn't know what that word meant, so I had to discuss a cow chewing its cud. Regurgitation is the concept here where they are taking old ideas and rehashing them, sometimes directly, sometimes thematically, but not just product ideas, even marketing concepts. And if we look at all the biggest watches of the show, the Tag Heuer Formula One Solargraph, old idea coming back. New stuff, but old idea coming back. The Rolex Land Dweller. Okay, yes, new movement, I guess a new name, but I mean, let's be honest, this is just part spin stuff. This is stuff from the late 70s all the way into the 90s when it comes to the hands, the dial texture, of course, the sort of oyster quartz style case and bracelet. Again, lovely watch, loved it. It was one of the better ones of the show. But again, pure regurgitation. Hublot with the 20th anniversary of the Big Bang, just sort of like a reissue sort of with the modern movement and parts, regurgitation. In fact, I found it difficult. And again, there's lots of watch brands that show outside of the show. I can't really include them in the conversation because they're not necessarily at Watches and Wonders, but I failed to see anything new. And I'm not talking about movements and stuff like that. I'm just talking about like overall designs or themes that is not pure regurgitation. And I just want to know if you had a reaction to that, maybe saw it differently.
So I saw a couple of interesting things. I mean, yes, some at the shows, some at the brands that were exhibiting around the show that was taking place. But I do agree that there was a lot this year of things that we have seen before in some way. But there is often this in the watch industry. It's an industry in particular where we go through cycles. And some years it's all about heritage reeditions. Some years it's about bringing back old concepts in new collections. Some years it's about developing something new. The thing I think we're weakest at as an industry, at least in the past 10, 15 years, has been around bringing in brand new collections, brand new ideas, because there's so much legacy in existing collections and products right now that brands are leveraging that and they're selling really well. So why risk discontinuing a product line that's so successful for you to bring in something new? That's, I think, a lot of the mentality that's going on with the brands when they have really strong product and they want to leverage that. I personally would like to see more evolution. And so rather than having the reissues and having the re-editions of pieces to say, well, how would we reinterpret that for the 21st century and for something that came out now rather than something that came out 30, 40 or 50 years ago? But certainly a lot of the brands are looking back and looking back in quite a literal way at the moment.
Do you find that when you submit designs, clients respond better to things that already existed or familiar than something fresh?
So the clients have differing levels of sort of excitement for brand new ideas, but everyone likes some level of comfort that you link back to something that has been seen before. If you do something that is too new and too different, it can actually start to feel uncomfortable, both for the brand, but then also for the potential customer down the line. We still need to link back to something that is representative of something people already experience. So if we're doing a really creative dress watch, for instance, we can maybe play with the case shape, play with the dial, play with the proportions, but we still want it to feel like a dress watch to someone, not like a strange object that they put on their wrist. And if we were doing a sports watch, for instance, we might do something much bigger, much bulkier, blockier, but we still want to get the same overall sense of proportion of a sports watch from someone who looks at it and goes, okay, I know what that's for. So you want to make people a little bit uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable that they think, what is that? Why would I ever want to buy that?
That's interesting to think about. I'll get back to that. Going back to the concept of beauty, I recognize that at its best, a watch that's contemporary captures something beautiful about the world at that time and puts it into the design. And we see a lot of that in the watches that we like to reissue or revisit, right? They captured something beautiful about the world at that time. And if it was truly beautiful, it'll still stay beautiful, right? Beauty is timeless if it's well done. And I worry that no one is really looking at what's beautiful in the world today, which is new. There's plenty of beautiful things out there. I don't care how ugly people think things are in the world. There's always beautiful concepts and popular things and shapes, and there's ways of doing it. So I'm wondering what's missing. Is it, I don't want to call it laziness, because there really isn't laziness in the design field. There may not be appetite for novelty, but there's definitely not laziness. What can we do different to better capture beauty of the world today to create those contemporary watches so that in the future we have some new heritage? Because I understand the concept of liking heritage, but if you don't build heritage today, this industry is in serious trouble 20, 30 years from now.
I'd agree with that. I've seen a lot more experimentation, is probably how I would describe it, with smaller companies recently. Some of the independent watchmakers, some of the micro brands, startups, scale-ups, brands that are looking to do things differently, and they don't have that heritage to play on. And so, yes, they will reference history. They will reference things that have gained them sort of understanding of the watch industry, and with the watchmakers in particular and the sort of the high-end independents, they may well look to some of their watchmaking heroes and watches of the past of fine watchmaking, but they take their own spin on that. They adjust things in their own little way. They put their signature onto something and they move us forwards a little bit. And every time a brand or a watchmaker comes along and does that, they move us forwards that little bit more. I think the risk is actually much greater for some of the bigger players and some of the more established companies, because there is much less onus on them to do these experimental things and to push things in this way. For them, if they've got a collection that's been selling well for 20 years or for 30 years, there's much less reason for them to go, okay, well, how would we start again?
I mean, you definitely have some brands scraping the bottom of the barrel, right? I mean, it was really fantastic that Tag Heuer had not yet meaningfully recreated the Formula One from the 80s. Obviously, they were bolstered by the success of the, Swatch and Omega Moon Swatch. Not that the new Formula One Solargraph is their version of that. It's much more expensive, but I think that sort of galvanized their decision. With that said, you look over at like a Cartier, and I actually forget the name of it because I didn't like the watch so much, but they were one of several companies this year to come out with those, those like blank slate watches with the small windows that they call them digital watches. They're really just backward standard watches with discs versus hands. And I mean, that didn't look good back then. It didn't look good yesterday. It doesn't look good now. I mean, don't you feel that in some sense Cartier has just kind of been like, uh-oh, guys, we ran out of heritage just pretty. We got to use all the other stuff now. It's like they go to great lengths. Oh, it's the Cartier Privé Tank au Guichet. Well, I mean, it's terrible. It's terrible. It never should have been brought back, at least not in this ugly of a form. Can you just maybe in your own words as a designer, you're more polite than me, say brands, please don't bring back ugly stuff?
So, I mean, so to the latter point, I would certainly encourage brands to bring back less, or if they are bringing it back, to reinvent it in a different way, rather than to bring back things literally in the same way that they were before. I think Cartier probably has one of the hardest jobs in the industry, is that they have such a limited and targeted number of really iconic designs that are so well established that bringing in new product lines alongside that is incredibly hard for them. I don't envy their design team in thinking about how would you start from scratch with a new watch that truly feels like a Cartier right now. It's a complex situation for them. But I think Tag Heuer is a really interesting example with the relaunched Formula One collection, because they've brought back the watches from the 70s or 80s, as you mentioned. But at the same time, they've also developed a new chronograph with a much more contemporary design as a new product line. And so they've sort of done the two at once. They've brought back something from the past and they've done something new, all to celebrate their new Formula One connection. And I think that's quite nice, because they're showing off their history, they're doing something interesting with it, and they're bringing in something for today. They're not just doing one or the other. So I think that there is a balance, and I think Tag Heuer has done a really nice example of that.
I agree that Cartier doesn't have it tough, but they have almost endless budget to experiment. They could hire you and people like you to come up with new concepts, even build prototypes, wear them for a while. They could be doing this endlessly. So I have to say, not shame, because I love Cartier. Oddly enough, I'm wearing a Cartier right now. That's accidental. But I do think that they have an obligation to invest more in creating new beauty. That the small little brands are doing it when they don't have it. It's a huge risk. Most of these little brands, one wrong watch means they go out of business. And that's very, very true. Yet the Cartiers of the world, again, can experiment endlessly. And I know I've talked to their executive. They're like, oh, but Ariel. They talk about some of the collections they have that didn't do so well, the Clé and some things like that. These are all good watches, but the Ballon Bleu. The Ballon Bleu, which was fantastic. When did it come out? The early 2000s, something like that. It was panned by the media when it came out. And it ended up for years being the best-selling Cartier. 2 men, 2 women, entry level with diamonds. People just couldn't get enough of it, and it was panned. But what Cartier did was come out with like 10 new models. Maybe one of them made it. They have to be like the movie companies. They just keep coming out with stuff. If it doesn't work, discontinue it and bring out more. And they were doing it for a while. For like 20 years, they just wouldn't stop with new stuff. There was the Drive, there was the Diver. And if it didn't work, they stopped it. And now they stopped even that. And I think that's the problem. It's like they're afraid of any bad media. It's like, what do you care? You're supposed to act like you don't care, because none of this stuff is bad. You know what I mean?
Certainly none of it's bad. There's some really cool experiments that they've done through the 90s and 2000s especially.
Yeah.
And there's huge potential there. I mean, it's not that you can't create a brand new Cartier and do something absolutely stunning. It's just that there's a lot of work to do that. And I think that there is massive potential there for them to do something creative, as with many of the other brands that are out there. A lot of brands have got the potential to do something new, but it's taking that risk. and taking that challenge to create something new that maybe won't be accepted straight away. Often watches are not. I mean, obviously the famous story of the Royal Oak for AP and no one wanting to buy one originally, and then it becoming the hottest thing around. AP had it again recently with the Code 59. That wasn't widely loved in the media at first. It's much more appreciated now. These things take time. Well, it seems
really?
to be. It seems they've done some really impressive complications. Some of those more recent watches, where they're pushing things a little bit more, do seem to be much more appreciated than that original media coverage when it first came out. Things take time. You're never going to release a new collection and have it widely adored by everyone.
Well, I will agree that the 1159 isn't as bad as it originally was. It's definitely a far better watch now. So it took them a decade?
Yeah, it can't have been a decade already, but it's certainly taken a fair few years. It's certainly taken a fair few years.
In 1862, Franz Ludwig Loebner began his career making precision timekeepers in what would become Germany. Settling in Berlin, he received an official clockmaker's mandate from the king and quickly gravitated towards the then pioneering technology of creating precise instruments to measure short durations of time. In 1881, Loebner was already an exclusive mark thanks to their ability to mass-produce chronographs able to measure 1/100th of a second. Just a few years later, they developed a clock able to measure 1/1000th of a second for sports and scientific purposes. Loebner continued to be a recognized German leader in precise and reliable high-accuracy timekeeping into the 20th century. They were among the first to use highly precise electric switches to trigger their mechanical measuring devices in order to overcome the limitations of human response time. Loebner has now been revived for a modern era. The company continues its long legacy of creating precise and beautiful timing equipment for today's demanding users. The Loebner Steel Racer features a novel chronograph-focused dial with an eccentric reading of the time and a sliding crown guard system. The time-only Loebner Sledge model features a smaller 100-meter water-resistant case and a new inner rotating timing bezel system. Learn more about the history of precision timekeeping instruments and the new Loebner wristwatch collection at lbnr.com. Okay, so which of the brands of the things you saw from Watches and Wonders you thought got the least attention? There's a lot of, watches that people are talking about. Do you see anything new out there that why isn't anyone talking about that?
I'm not sure I did. I think I saw a few things outside the show that I thought were quite interesting. Some of the independent watchmakers were pushing a few things, and there was a couple of creative sort of brands along the sides of the show. But I think the show was pretty well covered, and it did seem that there was a few big hitters as every year, and then there was everyone else. It didn't feel like there was any real sort of underrepresented, incredible pieces that I saw. But then again, I wasn't at the show to go around and see every piece. Everything I've taken this year has been through the media as I was busy with the dog training. So sadly, I can't.
Okay, so you needed to be there to have more an opinion. I get it.
I needed to be there.
I think that you're right. It's the ones that are underrepresented are not going to be in the media unless you're walking around and seeing it. Okay, fair enough. So let's go back to talking about watch design in general here. And one of the biggest changes in design over the last couple of years is AI. And I don't want to force you to have another boring AI conversation, but I noticed that this is actually in a lot of ways a boon for designers. Not that you're going to be replaced by AI, but you can use AI to experiment with ideas much faster than having to do it yourself, right? You can be like, I wonder what so-and-so would kind of look like in AI. And then AI makes something that is terrible, but at least it sort of shows you something which then you can then utilize. And I'm wondering if you've started to do this, you've seen others do this. It seems to be evolving pretty fast, but I think contrary to what people were believing that AI would replace designers, it's actually creating some of the most powerful tools yet for them. Would you agree or disagree?
I'd agree. It's certainly a tool. It's not a solution. It's a very long way. I'm going to say it's not, but it's a very long way from being able to offer you a finished design by you writing in what you want, and it gives you something out the end that you can go into production with. It's certainly a useful tool, and there are varying uses of AI throughout the design process, from early stage research through ideation, exploration, through to your design development, your rendering, some of the marketing even that brands are using, and some of the photography that they can create with AI now is quite impressive. So it's a very powerful tool if used in the right way, but it's complementary to a designer's skill set. You have to be able to control it in the right way, same as any other design tool, to get the most out of it. And something that I've seen, and I've experimented a little bit with it, is that actually the algorithms are not trained on watches so much. They're trained on cars and consumer products and other things. And so AI is not very good at watches right now. If you ask many of the current AI systems to generate X for a watch, it's not really going to be anywhere near as well resolved if you were to ask it for a new car, which it's very, very strong at. So things are moving at pace, but I don't think it's quite there yet. There are other AI-related things out there, though, particularly in the engineering space, that are really powerful and we're using every day now when it comes to some of the more generative approaches to manufacturing, when it comes to looking at where we need mass, where we need material in a movement for the bridges, in a case for its construction. There are some really powerful solutions out there. So it's about finding the right tool for the job and not using it as a go-to solution that's going to solve all your problems.
Yeah, do you think people out there believe that AI now can solve all your problems? Like, are there clients or designers that feel that way?
There are perhaps not existing brands, but there are certainly people out there who want to start a watch brand and say they will go onto one of the AI platforms, ask for a couple of watch designs, and then they will engage suppliers and say, can you make this watch for me? I know this because I've talked to some of the suppliers that I work with, and they've said, we've had people now come to us with some AI renders of a watch and said, can you make this?
Interesting.
It's not really the way in which I would go about creating a brand. I've seen the renders. I don't think they're going to sell too well, to be honest, but there are people out there doing that.
I've seen AI generate watches, and it's weird. I didn't actually know that they do cars well. That's news to me. I thought they'd still render them with 5 wheels and not enough windows.
There's been a lot of investment in the car industry with AI for ideation, and it's quite impressive. It really is quite impressive. Same for some consumer products as well. So for friends I have who work in industrial design and working on things for the home and furniture and goods like that, there's some really impressive things that it can do now.
That's cool. That's interesting. Well, maybe the future will have updates to it, but as of now, the watches I've seen rendered, similar to how AI used to do human faces or hands, is grotesque.
Yeah.
Like, it won't have the right markers, it won't have the right hands. It'll be like a weird pastiche of what a watch dial is supposed to be without it actually being a functioning watch dial, meaning it doesn't tell 12 hours, it doesn't have the right amount of hands. It's like a blurry version of blending together a bunch of watches, right? Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that the dial design is almost too much to even really sort of consider, because it is always just this mush of random things. The case designs are where it's slightly stronger than the dials, but even then, the cases are never well resolved. They never actually look like a proper watch case, and they're so far from what you would need to develop to be able to actually put something in production in a compelling way, that I just think we're years away from AI being a powerful tool for design in the watch industry. What it can be useful for, though, is early stage ideation, where you put in some ideas and you get some mood imagery back and some details, pattern, things like that. That can be quite powerful. So I've looked at it before for looking at guilloche patterns and those kinds of things, and you can generate some really interesting things there. So that's
you can try new art, as you said, textures and patterns, color pattern, color patterns and combinations and things like that. But if you leave it to its own devices, it's like a drunk surrealist creating a timepiece.
Totally. Absolutely. And it's why it's you can't leave design to an AI. There will always be at least to me, there will always be a human in the process somewhere to ensure that it is a good design and it is the right design, at least for industries such as watchmaking, which is really, it's more jewelry and art than a functional product. I'm sure in a few years you'll be able to say, can you design me a bookcase? And it will come out the end with the manufacturing drawings ready for a bookcase. But a watch is so much more than that and so different to that, that I think that a human will be involved for a few years to come. I certainly hope so. Otherwise, I'm out of a job.
Well, you actually got me worried about something what I think is going to happen. And what it's going to be, it's similar to like robots and humans on the road. There's going to be watches out there for sale designed by traditional designers such as yourself. And those that, the less scrupulous people out there are going to have built by AI. And they're going to compete on the market. I mean, I know there's some like cold-hearted, ruthless business person out there who's like, I'm going to see if it works. I'm going to see if the AI designed, luxury products sell better than ones created by a human. Now, I think we all know where this is going, right? Like we know that the AI thing is probably going to fail because best case scenario, all it can do is regurgitate what another human has already done. I don't think that unless it gets really, really lucky, it's going to be able to consistently come up with relevant, pretty products for humans.
I think it's a challenge.
It's a challenge. But I think we also agree that maybe sooner than later, there's going to be a fight where there's going to start to be, and again, probably at the low end, but I think there's going to be like AI designed watches that are in production. And I don't know if the owners will ever admit to it, but I think like you and I will be like, wait a minute, that doesn't look like a human came up with it, right?
I think so. I think with it's particularly AI for the creative design. So there's different levels of AI. Something that we're seeing much more though is generative design, and that is already starting to get into watches and into production pieces. And this is where you use mathematics to drive pattern creation and shape creation to do things that would be incredibly hard to conceive in your head as a designer of a pattern perhaps and to model and to shape. But you can use scripted language, so words like you would use for an AI platform, to feed into the creation of that pattern that you can then refine and develop as a designer to put into a watch. So
can you give me an example? Because that's very theoretical.
It's theoretical, but so I've used it on some dial plate designs for some brands at the moment that we're currently prototyping. But it's if you look at the car grille of a number of cars out there at the moment, you'll see that they might have bars that vary in width as they go across the front of the car, but also they vary in shape and size, and they look like an explosion of pattern. But rather than the designer having to have mathematically calculated how it changes in shape across the whole thing, that's done through computer software now. And it's
Is that known as a fractal?
Don't think so. I might be wrong. Maybe it is.
Okay, because some of the geometry
design.
They are, but other of those, it's like, actually some of those are like logarithms, basically. They're just being possible for, I mean, again, designers, not mathematicians, right? So even without the software, they're at a disadvantage.
Absolutely. So there's been some powerful tools around for a while that you need to know how to code to use. Then it became that you could do it if you knew how to build up the algorithm in a more pictographic way. And now we're starting to get to the point where you can communicate with it, much like an AI software, to ask it for what you want.
And I think that's really the impressive part about these tools is that you can use what they call in the industry natural language to have a conversation with these tools, and then they can do things for you. I'll use the watch industry as a good example. You have a CNC machine, right? This amazing manufacturing machine that has a multi-axis tool and making parts in very sophisticated shapes. Yet unless you know in detail how to program these machines, this is useless to you as a designer. But if you could tell the machine without knowing the intricate code and nuances of how it worked, what you wanted as an output, that would open up the ability for so many more people to use technology like this to experiment and make stuff. So in the same way, a lot of the AI software reduces the learning curve and the skill set necessary because you can have a more, again, natural language conversation with it, either typing or actually with your voice, and it produces some type of an output. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
So one of the reasons we haven't talked about your designs is that, as you said, you're oftentimes barred by confidentiality from discussing it. I mean, and that's the case with many designers. I think it's important mentioning that. Is there anything you can describe that you did design? Obviously, one of the ones that was announced that I reviewed on the website was the fire exit watch, which was part of the fireman brand. And that was a very interesting green watch that I liked. But that was sort of a fun project there. What are some of the other designs that you can talk about that you're particularly known for?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the fire exit watch, that was a few years ago now already, and a fun project for William Wood, which is a brand looking at first responders and firefighters, and they wanted to do something a bit more creative to cater to their audience who love firefighting, love first response, and want to support that in some way, something playful. So there's a couple of things that come to mind recently that have been quite public that I had the pleasure to be involved in. The first is a new Dutch brand called VPC. And it's a luxury sort of macro brand startup doing a go anywhere, do anything watch. It's a 37.5 millimeter dress watch, which is our first watch, but it's 120 meters water resistant. It's slim. It's on an entirely custom bracelet. And it's been a really exciting project to work on because every tiny detail has been so incredibly important with that project. Every piece of finishing on the bracelet, on the case, the hooded lugs that we developed there.
I'm just seeing it now. It's really lovely.
So there was a huge amount of attention to detail went into that watch, substantially more than would typically go into a watch at that price point, and was a really rewarding thing to work on. And we are actually really enjoying the process now of developing the second watch for that brand, which will be a little bit different, a different product category, but again leaning on that same design language that we developed for the brand there. So that's been a really rewarding thing to be involved in. A second one where I've really been more supporting the creative director for a brand has been Anoma, where Matteo has had an incredible vision for a new product line and a new brand. And I've had the pleasure to support him with turning his conceptual ideas into reality. And that really has been an exciting thing to work on because it's classical watchmaking, but it's sculpted and it's a very different take on case form and design, but still has some familiarity to what people might expect from a dress watch.
I'm on the VPC watch website right now, and it's very, very lovely. I didn't know about it until now, and I'm looking on the page here, and I see that it sort of proudly says designed by Max Resnick. Congratulations to you. That's lovely. I guess my question is, what's the managerial difference between a brand that is more open to stating who the designer is versus those that don't want other people to know? Are there, it seems to be a massive difference in character. What else is sort of different about the companies that do and don't promote the guy behind the design?
So I think it varies with every brand. It also varies with the input that the designer has had. With some projects, it's blank sheet of paper to the final design. Everything that you see has been done by me or done by a designer. With other brands, such as the one I mentioned with Anoma, there's such a strong conceptual brief and direction from the brand and from the brand's creative director. The job of the designer is purely there to support them in taking their idea to reality. And so the communications are naturally going to be different around that. And then when I work with some of the larger companies, the story there is not about the individuals, it's about the brand. It's about the maison that has existed for a long period of time. And so for them, they don't want to talk about people so much. They want to talk about them. They want to talk about the company, the history, the product line. And so every brand is different. I fully respect that. And it's a natural part of being a designer. There are some projects I'm very proud to be able to have my name attached to and to be able to talk about publicly. Others are a little bit quieter, but I can still mention them. And then there are some that I can't talk about. And I'd love to be able to talk about everything that I've ever worked on. But I recognize that that's not always the case.
Is it feasible now, or maybe in the future of your career, to say, I only want to be associated with projects that I can publicly state I designed, or is that a silly thing to ever want?
It's perhaps feasible. I could certainly look to choose to do less work with brands that don't talk about working with me and more brands that do. But to me, that's a fairly egotistical approach to design, because I don't want to be the the thing that's associated with the product. I want it to be a good product because it's a good product and it's right for that company, not because I've put my name to it or been involved in the design process. And so I certainly wouldn't say no to a brand who wanted to work with me but wanted it to be confidential if it's the right project, if it was the right working relationship, and we got something really exciting at the end.
I guess that makes sense. And I actually have to ask myself, how many designers out there are traditionally egotistical? Because there are some who are. I don't think you have to be egotistical to be a good designer, but I'd say that in the industry, probably at least 51% or more are what we define as egotistical, right?
It's a tricky one. I recognize why people want to have their name attached to something. Much like an artist, you want to be able to put your signature in the corner and say, that's my design.
Yeah.
But I think it's often very hard to do that because there are so many people involved in the design and creation of any new product, any new watch. And so it's very rarely just about one individual. There are certainly some projects where it is one individual that does all of the creative work and all the creative driving of the idea. But so often it's 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And then it becomes, well, who do you say designed it versus was involved, reviewed, fed into, iterated. And so it's very hard to draw the line at one particular sort of viewpoint on that.
The reason I talk about it so much is I think that it's increasingly important to the consumer. The more the consumer knows about this entire process, the more that they have curiosity. And at some point, if the designer isn't really mentioned, it almost becomes, I don't want to say scandalous, but kind of like, why didn't you say that this entire time? We would have actually liked it even more. So I think that, similar to the way a movie is made, you understand that the director isn't doing everything, right? But they tend to do good work. You understand that the lead actor obviously has a huge list of hundreds, if not thousands of people that are helping making them look good, yet you still like to follow their work. We know that talent is migratory in this industry, not just designers, brand managers, salespeople, and things like that. To truly get the best of the industry, in a sense, you have to follow personalities more so than brand names. So I think that brands being keen onto this, look at Gerald Genta. How many brands after he became famous are like, oh, hey, we got one too, right? So I wonder if it's not actually wise for them to be a little bit more open about some of the people involved, because they actually can become deeper in the culture and the conversation that is the watch collecting community.
I'd like to think that's possible. It's certainly, it's not the case that every brand keeps things very tightly controlled and secretive and don't talk about it. There are very much brands out there that are very transparent about that approach. And I think it's to be encouraged because it helps encourage deeper conversation and connection with people who are out there buying the watches. I've had the pleasure to be at a number of watch shows over the years with brands that I'm working with, and to be able to be at the booth talking to people, and they say, well, why did you do this? How did you do that? And they say, well, talk to the designer. He was here with us. And I can talk with them about the process that we went through, is a really nice conversation. And you help people to build that link with the brand. So I think that there are certainly some really big benefits in having the designer not front and center, but supporting and involved in the brands in some way. Of course, It's different for me as independent versus a brand who would have designers in-house, which makes it much easier for them because then they are their employees, whereas I work with a range of companies.
Well, I think that's important to point out. You are clearly talented enough to be someone who's hired full-time in-house at a brand. You made the career decision to stay independent, where you can announce some of your projects, not others, but you, like a hired gun, can go do the stuff that you like. And I want to sort of go back to sort of the brand side. They squirm and they're so squeamish about talking about this. When I was in Switzerland, as part of my trip, I went to see an amazing dial factory called ArtCAD. It's owned by LVMH. They make the dials for, Tag Heuer and Hublot and Zenith and stuff like that, but others as well. And, very specifically, when you're in there, they're like, don't take pictures of this. You'll see things in here that we're not supposed to say we make, but of course we make it, but don't mention it. And like those brands that don't want it mentioned, they got really nothing good to hide. They're just like, oh my gosh, someone might know that our dials are made in a factory with other Swiss brands that charge less. What will people think? And I think it's sort of this silly insecurity which rules a lot of this behavior, right?
It is a funny thing. And I think it's a cultural thing as well that's built up over so much time now that it's quite hard to unpick. Because as you say there, it's quite often there is no good reason as to why things are quite as confidential as they are. Of course, if it's not out in public yet or whatever else, there are some sensitivities there. But to be as closed off as it is right now, I think has developed over decades and decades, and is not going to be the work of a moment to untangle and to move back into a more transparent space. But there are brands doing it. There are people out there now who are very open as to the supply chains that they use, who they work with for their dials, for their case making, for their movements, obviously being the main one that lots of brands do now talk about where they get their movements from. Some don't. Some still say that it's their own in-house movement when it's very clearly known that it's a modified Salita or whatever else. But it is changing a little bit, but just maybe not quite as fast as some of us would like it to.
Okay, so at least it's going in the right direction. So totally different topic I've been thinking about. I like what I call high-end quartz. Maybe other people have different names for it. And these are not smart watches, but these are watches that are either digital or analog that have a quartz movement. Most of them come from Japan right now, but not exclusively Japan. I've always been a fan of high-end quartz. I like their accuracy. I like some of the interesting technology in them. But I think we'll agree that right now, for the most part, high-end quartz is not as popular as mechanical. So the question is, what do you think needs to happen? Maybe it's a design thing for high-end quartz, if you even like it, to be more popular and promising than it is today.
So I think that's twofold. I think firstly, I think there's some really exciting things to do with high-end quartz. I think you could do some really exciting stuff with it, because I think it opens up some creativity in how we lay out the movements and how we shape the movements if we wanted to, that we could do in a way that we perhaps couldn't do with mechanical watchmaking, where you're more forced into certain shapes and proportions. So I think there are some creative opportunities there, but I think it's twofold. I think that through good design, you can develop really exciting product, but you can have the best products in the world. If the marketing isn't right, I think you'll really struggle. And the marketing for so long has always been this perception that quartz is the cheaper, more affordable, more accessible version of watchmaking to high-end mechanical watchmaking, that to convince people in the main and in a larger group that there is this really high quality, valuable side of quartz watchmaking is going to be the higher barrier to jump. And so I think that the marketing side is just as important, if not more so, than the product.
What are you more excited about, high-end quartz analog or high-end quartz digital?
I think if it's high-end quartz analog is probably the way to go, because then you can still introduce amazing dial finishing, hands, facets, polishing, brushing, everything else. You can still bring all of the manufacturing techniques and materials from high-end watchmaking into the project. If you go digital, because so much of your space then gets taken up with a screen of some kind, and typically not that exciting a screen because you don't have the power for a really amazing OLED, whatever, you lose a lot of real estate and surface area that you could be doing something much more artistic with. And so I think analog has more potential because you can still leverage all of this amazing sort of artistic craft that you don't have so much opportunity for with a digital display.
That makes sense. And while I really cheer for high-end digital displays, what I recognize is it requires vastly more investment and is much more risky, in the sense that to have something that looks so much better than a cheap LCD or OLED screen that consumers want to pay for more for is tough. They've attempted it. I remember there are some very high-end LCD screens that I appreciate. Not sure if everyone appreciates it, but for someone to come out with it, they would have to create basically a whole new assembly line and technology to do so, whereas you can use existing supply chains, as you said, to make those high-end finished hands and dials and things like that would suit a timepiece better. So I think that makes practical sense. So the last topic I want to get into has to do with some feedback from you on how people can best engage with design professionals. Design professionals, I think, working alone are not at their best. I think most of the time, the best design you get is when you find the right prompt for the right designer. And when you merge those two things, you can get the best result. The designer on his or her own may never think of the right prompt. And the idea person with a prompt, without finding the right designer, may never come out with something satisfying as a result of it. So do you agree that all good designs may initially begin from a great prompt?
Yes, absolutely. The first thing that I say to anyone who comes to me who's looking to create a new project, typically saying, I've got an idea for a watch, I want to create X, whatever this watch might be. Great. But what's the brand about? What's the story about? Where are you going as a company so we know what the product should reflect and how the product can support you in that journey? And then what is the design brief for that first project? What's important to you? What's your unique selling point of the product if you've got one? What makes you different to anyone else out there? The more vision someone can have for what they want the new watch to be and where it fits within their wider brand world and environment, the better the quality of the design response. And that's the same for any designer. A designer can go off in 100 different directions when they get a new brief, but a bit like a lighthouse, if the brand has said, actually, we want to head over here, look in this direction, it gets the designer starting off in a point where everyone's aligned and thinking this is exciting. And then as you go down there, you open things up, they can then start to say, actually, I don't really like this, but I quite like this, and this is interesting. And then you can start to narrow down and work together to find something that really is representative of a good outcome for that project. But certainly you need the right prompt and you need to head off in the right direction. Otherwise, and I've seen it happen with projects, thankfully not for quite some time now, where you go off in one direction and then they say, actually, no, I think maybe we'll go over here. And then you go over there and then you can spend months going back and forth without really finding anything because you haven't had that really strong baseline and that starting point. So yes, that prompt, that design brief is absolutely key.
So explain a little bit more what you need from a client in terms of that prompt or context in order to get started, so to say.
So it varies depending on the level of sort of establishment of the company. If it's a company that's been around for a very long time, the brand is a known quantity, you know how to reflect that brand, that world that they're in, the current product line. And it's how do we fit something in that's new that extends that? And so the brief from them will be more specific as we're going into a new product category, or we're reinventing this timepiece in our collection, or we've got these things here, we want to do something that's complementary to that. Whereas if you're a new or a younger company, it's important not to start with the product, but to start with an understanding of what the company should be about. Because it's much harder to wrap a really good brand around a product than to develop a really good product that it supports an already sort of clear direction for a brand. And so the brand is better to say, this is what we're about, this is what we want to be doing. And then we can think about a product that supports that, rather than create a really exciting looking watch, whatever it might be, and then say, okay, well, how do we put a brand on that that's going to convince people to buy it? That's always much harder and actually much less rewarding.
I'm going to come up with an analogy, and you tell me if I'm off or this actually is spot on, because I think that I like to break things down into, I think ways that non-creative managers can digest, right? Because that's really the key, is getting them to sort of get it. Sure. Okay, so let's pretend that you as a designer are like a tailor making a set of clothing or an outfit, okay? Oftentimes, it's as though they're telling you to design clothing without you ever seeing who's going to wear it. But for you to design the best clothing, you need to see who's going to wear it, what is their shape, what do they do, what is their lifestyle like. The more you know about the person wearing it, the better the suit can be. Is that a good analogy?
Yeah, I think so. And also sometimes, as I say, particularly with the smaller companies or those that are just starting out, it's also knowing who's making the suit. Is other people making the suit a really cutting edge, slightly edgy, dramatic, new take on design that are a bit of an upstart and a bit of a rebel? Or are they a really serious, really long established, very sort of classical kind of suit maker as such?
Because, do you mean the brand or the manufacturer?
The brand. The manufacturer doesn't really matter so much because obviously, we can work with whatever the right supply chain is for any given product. But to use your suit analogy, we need to know who's making the suit, who's going to put their name to that suit and sell it to those people. Because there's no point designing something really refined, really classical, really elegant, and then it's being sold by a really aggressively sporty company. There's a mismatch.
Okay, I guess in my example, like you're the suit maker and they're the person wearing it, right? But I guess I see what you're saying. So, but that goes into knowing about the client, right? The more you know about the brand, the more you get. Okay, so that makes sense.
And
so
just on that, sorry, but knowing about the client is absolutely so key. And to the discussion we had earlier around how designs are often polarizing and they're not liked by everyone, that's really important, because if you're designing for a particular kind of client, there will be another kind of client out there who absolutely dislikes what you're doing. And that's fine, so long as the people that you are designing for do really like it. And so knowing who you're designing for is absolutely key to any new project.
Now, that's actually an interesting sticking point, because you make it sound simple, but I think, a brand usually isn't, I am this personality, design a watch for it, I don't care what anyone else says. Usually they're like, hey man, I want to make money, right? So they can't just start with like, hey everyone, this is the watch I'm selling because I want to make money, don't you want to wear it? That's going to sell 0 watches. You have to do something beyond that. How do you get out of them, especially those early stage brands that like haven't figured that stuff out? How do you get them to brainstorm where it's like, you're a faceless person right now. You need a face. You need a background. What's your backstory? What's your motivation here? Like, how do you get them to realize they need all that?
Through conversation, really. And it doesn't sort of happen overnight. It takes time, and often it is several weeks, several months of talking with, engaging, meeting clients before we actually start working on the development of a new product, particularly if it's their first one. Even if it's their second or third watch, a lot of the early stage work before we put pen to paper or pencil to paper and start sketching and exploring something, it's about really understanding what are we developing, who are we developing it for, how are we developing it. And it's my job as a designer to ask the right questions to help them as a brand in figuring out what they want to achieve. They might have lots of ideas, but for me, I have to facilitate that process so they can get something down on paper that says, okay, of all the things we're thinking about, these are the priorities. There might be some secondary priorities or benefits that we could get if we do it right, but these are the things that are most important to us. And when we know what's most important to them, we can then start to use that to get us heading off in the right direction.
See, I just figured out my problem. You give these people months to figure it out. I have like a 10-minute conversation with them. I'm like, I just try to beat it in them. Guys, you're missing this. And they can't figure it out that fast. So slow is the way to go.
Slow is the way to go, and take them on the journey with you. So there are some people I work with who are incredibly good at developing a brief and developing a really clear vision for what they want to achieve. And they will come to me with something really clear and they say, this is my idea. I don't quite know how to make it reality, but can you help me get there? There are others that say, we have this gap in our collection here. We're not quite sure how to fill it, but we know we need a new product line in 2027. What do we do next? And that's where you might take a few months figuring that out before you start.
So I can't immediately tell people their brand is an empty husk. I have to walk them down a journey of self-discovery for them to realize they have nothing yet. Okay, I got it.
Take it slow. Take it slow.
We're basically out of time, Max. I just want you to tell everyone where they can learn more about you on the internet.
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Ari, for having me here today. It's been an absolute pleasure. So I'm on Instagram. It's just Max Resnick Design, quite simply. And then I also have a website with a few projects that I've had the pleasure of being able to share publicly. And that's maxresnick.design. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much. This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with watch designer Max Resnick. Max, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ari.